Micah Dempsey stood at the foot of the courthouse steps with his heart pounding like thunder in his chest. The 40-year-old columns loomed above him, worn from decades of storm and sunlight, yet standing firm. He tightened his grip on the battered messenger bag slung over his shoulder, his fingers brushing against the stack of carefully prepared papers inside it. Though barely 19 years old, Micah was determined not to show any hint of fear. There were people counting on him, people who believed in him far more than the world ever had. He tilted his head toward the morning sun that painted the courthouse in gold and exhaled slowly, a silent meditation on the enormity of what lay ahead. Ever since his mother's wrongful arrest, every decision he had made had led him to this moment. He was about to walk into the lion's den of legal professionals and declare that he, a college dropout with no formal legal training, intended to defend a man who society believed was guilty. The notion seemed absurd, but deep in his bones, Micah knew that if he did nothing, no one else would. As he finally crossed the threshold into the marble-floored lobby, passers-by glanced at him, some with mild curiosity, others with outright dismissal. His maroon sweatshirt and faded jeans contrasted sharply with the suits that swirled around him like sharks in dark waters. He swallowed, steeling himself for the stairs. He had grown accustomed to them long before he ever dreamed of stepping into a courtroom. Micah approached a security guard, handed over his ID, and waited for the guard to finish a skeptical once-over. A single overhead light buzzed uncomfortably. The silence felt thick, heavy, as though it carried every unspoken judgment cast upon him. Once cleared, he made his way to the corridor where his hearing would be held. Excerpts of conversation drifted through the hall, a low murmur of tension and procedure. Some lawyers tried their final negotiations in whispered tones. A few individuals in wrinkled jackets paced anxiously by the benches. Through it all, Micah advanced with his shoulders squared, clinging to a single truth. To fight injustice, you do not need a crown or a robe. You only need a reason and a fearless heart. A door labeled Courtroom A stood ajar at the end of the hallway. In the hush of that threshold, Micah gathered all the courage he could muster and stepped inside. The space was unexpectedly large, lined with rows of wooden pews that creaked under the weight of silent bystanders. The judge's bench loomed at the far end, a place where destinies were shaped and sealed on a daily basis. Micah scanned the faces present. On one side sat the prosecuting attorney, clad in a tailored charcoal suit and poised with unnerving calm. His expression carried an air of mild condescension, as though he already knew how the day's spectacle would end. Beside him was a young paralegal, riffling through a thick stack of briefs, ignoring Micah completely. A little farther back, a heavy-set woman with elegantly coiffed hair sat behind the prosecution's table. From the set of her jaw, Micah suspected she was no mere spectator. He felt something twist inside him when he spotted Mr. Saunders at the defense table. An older man with salt and pepper hair huddled in the seat where the defendant was meant to wait for judgment. His posture was bowed as though burdened by a punishment he had yet to officially receive. Despite the tension in the air, the moment Mr. Saunders met Micah's eyes, he attempted a small nod and a shaky smile. Micah answered with a determined lift of his chin. Despite the odds, he was here to defend that man, unorthodox as it might seem. 5 days earlier, Mr. Saunders had tearfully admitted to Micah that no proper attorney would represent him. He was a middle manager at a large pharmaceutical company, suddenly charged with leaking corporate secrets and forging financial statements. His employer, Helix Solutions, had vast resources, and as rumor had it, connections that could make or break any legal career. Most lawyers had refused the case the instant they heard Helix was involved. But Micah hadn't refused. Micah had a cause, not only to protect an innocent man, but also to chip away at a system that crushed the underdog. After all, he had watched a system crush his own mother. He swallowed as the bailiff instructed everyone to rise. Judge Coralie Huang emerged, her black robe swaying gently around her ankles as she took her seat. The gavel struck. A single note that reverberated off the marble columns, a note that dictated hush, demanded formality, and signaled that any illusions of comfort or casualness ended at the threshold. The audience's collective focus narrowed to the judge, whose intelligent gaze swept across the room. Micah saw her eyes pass over him, her expression not so much hostile as curious. It was the faint raise of her brow and the lingering stare that asked, "Who is this boy stepping forward with confidence he has no right to possess?" Prosecutor Martell rose with a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. He introduced himself with professional crispness. Then came the moment Micah both dreaded and anticipated. "And for the defense?" Judge Huang prompted. Micah set down his bag, cleared his throat, and stood. "My name is Micah Dempsey, Your Honor, here on behalf of Roger Saunders." The wave of hushed laughter from various spectators was immediate, though stifled by the judge's glare. It wasn't so much an uproar as a collective ripple of disbelief. This teenager, or barely adult, in casual attire with a battered bag, was claiming to stand toe-to-toe with the city's top prosecutor. Prosecutor Martell wasted no time. "Your Honor, I object to this individual's self-appointment as counsel. There is no record of him having passed the bar, and the state has regulations." "Yes, I understand," Judge Huang interrupted with careful composure. She turned her attention toward Micah. "Mr. Dempsey, I take it you are not a licensed attorney?" Micah forced a steady breath. "That's correct, Your Honor. I do not hold a law degree or a license to practice. But my client has requested my representation, and I've done extensive research to defend him. I ask that you allow me to present my arguments in his behalf." A low, incredulous murmur spread in the gallery. Seated at the back, Helix Solutions' legal representative, a poised woman in a sleek emerald suit, arched her eyebrow at him. Her name was Delphine Harlow, whispered among corporate circles as a high-stakes litigator with a reputation for cutting corners. Judge Huang studied Micah. A flicker of something akin to sympathy surfaced in her eyes, but it did not reduce the seriousness of her tone. "We do have constitutional allowances for pro se representation. However, you are not the defendant, Mr. Dempsey. You have no formal standing here unless you can prove—" "Your Honor," came Mr. Saunders' trembling voice. He stood with shaky resolve. "I've asked this young man to speak for me. He has my power of attorney. I tried to find a lawyer, but no one would take my case. They warned me Helix Solutions is involved, that I'd lose no matter what. Please, let him speak." Judge Huang drummed her manicured fingers against her desk. The swirl of tension had the gallery collectively leaning forward, all eyes focused on Micah. The prosecutor rolled his gaze ceilingward, exasperated. Even some of the reporters scribbling notes looked skeptical about the spectacle. Finally, the judge sighed. "We'll proceed conditionally, but Mr. Dempsey, if I find this is a distraction, I will not hesitate to remove you." Micah's chest expanded with a silent swell of relief. He lowered his eyes respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor." Without missing a beat, the prosecutor began laying out the charges against Mr. Saunders, how certain corporate documents had been leaked, jeopardizing Helix's competitive stance, and how the alleged forgeries had stolen corporate funds to the tune of $500,000. Micah's mind buzzed with every detail. He had spent the past month poring over every piece of publicly available information he could find. Financial ledgers, internal memos, depositions. The deeper he'd gone, the more certain he became that Mr. Saunders was merely a scapegoat, and that Helix Solutions, with all its powerful connections, wanted a tidy fall guy. When the prosecutor finished, Micah stepped forward. Even though his stomach tightened with dread, he willed his voice not to shake. "Mr. Saunders, my client has been a loyal employee of Helix for over 18 years, Micah began. He has consistently received performance commendations. Now he is being accused of forging documents. But let's examine how this evidence conveniently appeared only after Helix faced a public scandal about price-fixing medication. Could it be that the company needed someone to blame for certain financial irregularities? Someone who wouldn't have the power to fight back? A hush fell. The judge didn't interrupt. Micah pressed on, presenting his questions carefully. At one point his throat threatened to tighten, but he recalled why he was doing this. Memories of how, 3 years before, his mother had been tried for theft at her workplace. She'd insisted on her innocence, claimed she was framed by a corrupt manager. But no lawyer championed her. With no money for a robust defense, she had ended up behind bars. Micah's mother had lost her job, her friends, her health. And the system just kept rolling, watching his mother suffer, and eventually succumb to illness while incarcerated, was the wound that refused to heal. Micah argued with as much clarity as he could muster, citing references from legal texts he'd memorized. He used the simplest words to ensure everyone understood him, hoping clarity might mask his lack of formal training. A few times, Judge Huang's expression shifted from polite neutrality to mild surprise, as though recognizing actual substance in the arguments. The hush in the gallery swelled, but the fight was only beginning. Helix corporate lawyer Delphine Harlow requested permission to speak as an interested party. Once allowed, she stood with a practiced grace. "I find it highly suspect," she began, "that a young man without credentials has managed to craft a narrative about corporate conspiracies. It's an insult to the real attorneys present that we should allow this performance." She turned to Judge Huang. "We request immediate dismissal of these accusations Mr. Dempsey has lodged against Helix. Our concern is that this proceeding could damage a reputable company's image." Prosecutor Martel seized on her momentum. "Yes, Your Honor, he's wandering into the territory of slander with no direct proof. If he wants to accuse Helix of wrongdoing, he should have something more substantial than speculation." Micah's fists tightened at his sides. "I'm merely pointing out the inconsistencies, Your Honor. If Helix has nothing to hide, why stifle this line of questioning?" Judge Huang glanced at Micah, then at Harlow and Martel. She tapped a pen against the surface of her bench. "The court will allow further inquiry but remain focused on Mr. Saunders' defense. We are not here to litigate Helix's entire corporate structure unless you can prove direct relevance. Mr. Dempsey, do you have witness statements or material evidence connecting your client to these alleged forged documents?" Micah drew a breath. He had a partial lead. A friend of Mr. Saunders, a low-level IT technician, had mentioned suspicious server logs, but that friend had vanished. He wouldn't return calls and had abruptly quit his job. Micah suspected intimidation. Yet suspicion wouldn't cut it. He needed something concrete. And for now, he only had enough to raise doubt, not enough to definitively exonerate Mr. Saunders. "I'm working on obtaining them, Your Honor," Micah answered. Martel gave an exaggerated chuckle. "Working on obtaining them? We can't play detective in the middle of a formal hearing." Judge Huang folded her arms. "For now, I will grant a continuance. We will recess until tomorrow morning. Mr. Dempsey, if you aim to continue in this capacity, I expect you to present something more than circumstantial speculation. Understood?" Micah nodded. He felt the pressure of the entire room bear down on him. He only had a few hours to secure evidence or lose the chance to save Mr. Saunders from certain conviction. The judge signaled recess with a decisive rap of the gavel. People shuffled about, but the tension remained. As Micah packed his documents, he saw the silhouette of Delphine Harlow moving toward him. She had a faint, polite smile, like a cat approaching a cornered bird. "Mr. Dempsey," she said with subtle menace. "Impressive display for a layman, but let's be clear, you're treading on dangerous territory. Helix Solutions takes defamation very seriously." Micah felt a chilly wave of intimidation, but he held his ground. "I'm simply defending an innocent man." Harlow's eyes flashed with something like dark amusement. "Innocence can be subjective when you don't have the right resources. Think carefully. You wouldn't want to find yourself out of your depth. I'm sure you can guess how easily Helix can bury you under legal action if we see fit." She offered him a thin-lipped smile. "Have a pleasant day, Mr. Dempsey." He watched her walk away, her heels clicking in an authoritative rhythm, and realized she didn't so much as glance back. To her, it was a casual warning from a superior to an upstart. Micah's heart hammered, but he gritted his teeth. She was wrong if she thought intimidation alone would silence him. On his way out, a voice called from behind. "Wait, Micah!" Mr. Saunders, short of breath, hurried up to him. "My boy, are you sure we can pull this off?" Micah set a hand on the man's shoulder. "I can't guarantee anything, but I promise I'll do everything in my power." Then he studied Mr. Saunders' lined face, the worry etched in every crease. "Look, I'll do more digging tonight. You just hold on. Trust me." Mr. Saunders lowered his gaze. "I do, son. More than you know." Micah walked out into the early afternoon glare. A swirl of uneasy confidence filled him. He was in it now, fully, and there was no going back. For a moment he recalled a quote his mother used to keep pinned to the refrigerator. "In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity." She attributed it to Albert Einstein. At the time, Micah had barely understood it. Now it felt like a guiding star. He repeated the words in his mind and let them steel his resolve. He had one night to find something definitive, some clue that Helix was orchestrating a frame job. He only prayed that the lead he had would materialize before it was too late. That evening, Micah huddled in the cramped second-floor office of a community center he volunteered at. No one but a janitor roamed the hallways at this hour, which gave Micah the privacy he needed. Using a borrowed laptop, he combed through the public legal dockets, Helix corporate press releases, and obscure threads in the corners of the internet. He had seen a name repeatedly pop up in connection with Helix's finances: Kyle Timmons, a mid-level accountant rumored to have departed suddenly 2 months ago. Since then, Timmons had disappeared off the radar. His phone was disconnected, his social media accounts vanished. If Timmons was anywhere near the controversy, he might be the piece Micah needed. A Helix employee who had discovered wrongdoing and got quietly removed. Micah spent hours attempting to track Timmons down. Each lead turned to a dead end. By the time the digital clock on the dusty desk read 2:14 a.m., Micah's eyes stung from exhaustion. His mind raced in circles, frustration burning through him. He had begun to fear that Timmons was simply gone. But as he scrolled deeper into an employment forum, he found a cryptic thread, looking for advice about forced NDAs from big corporations. The user had posted under an alias, KT in the shadows. In those posts, there were enough personal references, time employed, job duties with a pharmaceutical giant, that it had to be Timmons. The final note read, "If you know any lawyers who aren't afraid to fight Helix, please connect me. I can't stay silent. People's lives are being ruined." Micah's chest pounded. Maybe Timmons had gone off-grid for a reason. He tried to message the user, hoping for any response, but the thread was 6 weeks old. The chance of success was minimal. Still, he poured out a careful request that Timmons help exonerate an innocent man. He asked if Timmons had evidence or documents that proved wrongdoing. Finally, he hit send. Then, with an audible sigh, he sank into the squeaky office chair, letting the swirl of desperation recede. He had to cling to hope, even if it felt intangible. He glanced through the window at the flickering streetlight outside. If Timmons didn't show, if no other evidence emerged, Mr. Saunders would be convicted, and Delphine Harlow would have effectively crushed another underdog. He refused to let that happen. The next morning found Micah back in courtroom A, running on 4 hours of sleep and 2 cups of coffee. Judge Huang promptly began, her gaze fixed on Micah with curiosity tempered by caution. Prosecutor Martel opened with a renewed motion to ban Micah from continuing, citing the law. "We have no new evidence from Mr. Dempsey," he declared in a tone thick with triumph. "He's stalling, hoping for a miracle." Micah's nerves flared. "Your Honor," he said, stepping forward, "I request more time to gather records that will show how certain anomalies—" "Time is running out, Mr. Dempsey," the judge warned. "Mr. Saunders is due for a formal arraignment next week. If you cannot present something credible, we must move forward with standard procedure." Prosecutor Martel wore a faint smirk. "He has nothing, Your Honor." Micah clenched his fists under the table. He had to fight with only the facts he currently possessed. "I have cause to believe Helix orchestrated false documents to implicate Mr. Saunders. I can show the pattern of short seller that Helix engaged in around the same time these alleged leaks were discovered. They profited from the scandal, but someone took the blame. If you'll allow me, I can walk through the timeline." The door at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Heads turned. A slender woman with dark hair and an anxious expression stepped in. Her eyes darted around until she spotted Micah. Slowly, she raised her hand in an almost apologetic wave. Micah recognized her from the photograph he'd found in an old Helix employee newsletter. Graciela Timmons, Kyle Timmons' sister. Graciela Timmons, sister to whom Kyle had been, that time sister. Micah's pulse leapt. She was carrying a slim folder in her hands, pressed tight to her chest. A hush spread through the room, as though everyone sensed an unexpected development. Judge Huang cleared her throat. "Mr. Timmons, is it?" She nodded, stepping forward stiffly. "Yes, Your Honor. I apologize for the interruption, but I have information relevant to Mr. Saunders' defense." Harlow stood abruptly, face blanching. "Your Honor, we have no notice of this witness. I object to allowing her to speak without prior arrangement. This is irregular." Judge Huang stared down from the bench. "We'll allow Ms. Timmons to speak." "Step forward, Ms. Timmons, please." Michael locked eyes with her. The hope that soared inside him was almost dizzying. She gave him a small nod before turning to the judge. "I'm not a lawyer, but my brother Kyle worked for Helix Solutions. He discovered that certain financial statements were being manipulated, possibly as part of a bigger scheme. He tried to blow the whistle internally, but then he was pushed out. Fearing retaliation, he vanished. He's in hiding. But he told me if anything happened and someone like Mr. Saunders was indicted, I should deliver these." She opened the folder, revealing an external hard drive and a stack of printouts. Micah's heart hammered, certain that these could be the tangible proof. Prosecutor Martel and Delphine Harlow were on their feet, protests flying about procedure and reliability. The judge signaled for silence. "Approach." Judge Huang said softly. Graciela handed the materials to the bailiff, who in turn passed them to the judge. Judge Huang examined the top page, eyes slowly widening. "What exactly am I looking at, Ms. Timmons?" Kyle downloaded files from Helix's private servers. They contain ledger changes, IP logs, some of which show that the data pinned on Mr. Saunders was inserted by an administrative account that wasn't his. "I'm not fully versed in the details, but Kyle explained that it proves a forgery from within Helix." A collective hush rose, and Micah noticed Delphine Harlow's normally composed features twist into thin-lipped anxiety. "Your Honor," Harlow said tightly, "even if these files are from Helix servers, obtaining them likely violated an NDA." Micah cut in, voice trembling with emotion. "Evidence of a crime can't be suppressed by an NDA, Ms. Harlow." Judge Huang eyed the pages more carefully. Then she lifted her gaze to Ms. Timmons. "We will need to verify authenticity. If these files are indeed legitimate, it could be highly relevant." She turned to Micah. "Mr. Dempsey, how do you propose we proceed?" Micah swallowed. "We request an immediate forensic review. If these logs show that Mr. Saunders' account was tampered with, that means he's innocent. We also have a right to see who manipulated the account." Harlow's lips parted in protest, but the judge was already speaking. "We'll adjourn for a short recess. I will have a forensic IT specialist review the contents. Court will reconvene once that process is complete." Micah managed a shaky nod of gratitude to Ms. Timmons as the judge's gavel fell. The entire room broke into frantic whispers, half of them swirling around this abrupt turn of events. Prosecutor Martell shot Micah a glare, as though furious his clean, open and shut case was unraveling. Nearby, Mr. Saunders gazed at Micah with teary wonder. "Graziella Timmons," her voice trembling, told Micah, "I'm sorry if this is too little, too late. My brother asked me to wait until it was absolutely necessary. He believed Helix might go after me otherwise." "You did the right thing," Micah assured her. "Mr. Saunders is grateful, I know it." She lowered her gaze. "Just thank you for not letting them trample over someone again. My brother wanted me to say, 'Justice can't breathe where fear presides.' He always used to quote that. I guess it's something he read in a law article. I hope it helps." Her words lingered in Micah's mind. Justice can't breathe where fear presides. Maybe that was why so many people had turned a blind eye to Helix. They feared the corporate beast. But fear was exactly what he intended to stamp out. As the bailiff escorted everyone out, Micah hurried to follow the specialist, who was already sequestering himself in a small side room to examine the data. If the data was as damning as it sounded, Micah's greatest challenge would be making sure it didn't vanish or get discredited before it could see the light of day. Hours trickled by, turned into an entire day of analysis. Judge Huang had postponed formal court sessions, allowing for a thorough examination. Tension thickened with each passing hour. Micah found himself pacing the hallway, ignoring the gnawing hunger in his stomach. He couldn't rest, couldn't breathe properly. Mr. Saunders sat on a bench close by, hunched and silent. People occasionally passed through, journalists peering around corners. Delphine Harlow and Prosecutor Martell had retreated to a corner where they whispered, throwing occasional glances in Micah's direction. Finally, near twilight, the side room door opened. A tall, bespectacled man wearing IT credentials emerged, carrying the folder and the external hard drive in a plastic evidence bag. He nodded once to the bailiff, who disappeared into the judge's chambers. Within minutes, the gavel's echo resummoned everyone back into courtroom A, an air of uneasy anticipation crackling like static. Once seated, Judge Huang glanced solemnly around. "The forensic analysis is complete. The material Ms. Timmons provided appears authentic. Furthermore, we have evidence showing that the user account tied to Mr. Saunders' alleged forgeries was accessed from an executive-level terminal at Helix Solutions. The logs strongly indicate that Mr. Saunders did not input nor direct these changes." Micah felt dizzy relief flood his veins. At his side, Mr. Saunders sank back in his chair, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. The hum of shock that spread among the observers was immediate. So, Helix was forging documents. Someone at Helix, at least. In the crowd, a journalist furiously typed notes on her phone. Judge Huang cleared her throat, reading from a printout. "In light of this new evidence, the court has serious doubts regarding the prosecution's case. Ms. Harlow, if Helix Solutions wishes to clarify its role, it will have that opportunity. For now, Mr. Saunders is released on his own recognizance, pending further investigation. Charges may well be dropped if the prosecution cannot dispute these findings. And Mr. Martell, I suggest you expedite your re-examination of the evidence." There was a moment, just a single heartbeat, when Micah's eyes locked with Harlow's. She looked like she was struggling not to lash out. Her pupils were narrowed, her jaw tight. And in that moment, Micah saw it. Helix might be wounded, but not defeated. The stakes had soared. If Helix's legal team realized that a 19-year-old had just jeopardized their careful scapegoating, they would fight back twice as hard. They might not be able to silence Timmons' sister in open court, but threats and intimidation had never been off their table before. Outside the courtroom, Micah was bombarded by a small cluster of reporters calling his name. He shielded his eyes from the flicker of camera lights and glimpsed the swirl of curious spectators who had caught wind of the unusual case. A teenage lawyer unraveling a corporate frame job. Of course, they found it sensational. For a fleeting instant, he felt triumph. Then he saw Mr. Saunders half hidden behind him, trembling with relief. That was the real reason for celebrating. A good man was free, at least for now. The staff directed them outside where the late afternoon sun bathed the front steps in coppery light. Immediately, 4 or 5 reporters approached with questions. "Mr. Dempsey, do you have a statement?" "Micah, do you plan to become an attorney now? Is it true Helix might face charges?" He lifted a hand to request silence, but words stuck in his throat. He'd never spoken into a microphone in his life. He was just a kid who'd read a lot of law textbooks. Suddenly, he remembered one of his mother's favorite quotations. "Sometimes you have to jump before you can see where you'll land." Mustering the nerve, he spoke in a halting voice. "I just want to say, Mr. Saunders is a hard-working man, and I'm grateful the court gave us time to produce evidence. Everyone deserves a fair chance to defend themselves. That's all." A swirl of more questions followed. Then, from the corner of his eye, Micah spotted a flash of emerald. Delphine Harlow. She stood off to the side, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed on him in unguarded contempt. Their eyes met for a second. She mouthed one word. "Careful?" And then pivoted, disappearing into the crowd with a swirl of her designer coat. A chill scuttled down Micah's spine. That was no empty threat. In the midst of chaos, Mr. Saunders placed a hand on Micah's shoulder. "I'm headed home to my wife, my friend. I can't thank you enough." Micah forced a smile. "Go be with your family. We'll keep in contact." As Mr. Saunders left, Graziella Timmons approached, hugging the folder to her chest. Her anxious expression softened. "I'm heading out of the city. I have no idea if Helix will come after me, but I can't risk staying in one place too long." Micah frowned with concern. "Do you have somewhere safe?" "I think so. My aunt's place 2 states over. But please, if you hear from Kyle, tell him he doesn't have to hide forever." "I promise," Micah said. "Take care of yourself, Miss Timmons." She offered a trembling smile and vanished into the bustling crowd. Micah exhaled deeply, stepping away from the cameras, mind whirling. Helix wouldn't let this be. They'd try to bury the evidence or twist the story. He needed a plan to protect Mr. Saunders and possibly the Timmonses. In a system that favored money and power, the truth might not be enough on its own. The day was inching toward dusk. Slipping free of the reporters, Micah found an isolated bench across from the courthouse, hidden beneath a maple tree whose leaves glowed orange. A swirl of relief and dread warred inside him. He was closer to triumph than he'd ever been, but Helix loomed like a giant. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, weary to his very bones. "Mom," he whispered into the hush of the descending night. "I did it, but I'm scared of what comes next." The rustling leaves offered no response, only the gentle reminder that the world marched forward. He rose from the bench, steeling himself with a silent vow. If Helix wanted a war, they would find him ready. That evening, as the city's high-rises glittered against a moonlit sky, Micah retreated to a tiny 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of downtown. Technically, it belonged to his best friend, Russell Song, a high-spirited law student he had met a year ago at a community workshop. Russell, older by 6 years, had quickly become the big brother figure Micah never had. Russell was rummaging through a fridge crammed with leftover takeout when Micah slipped in. "Welcome back, champ," Russell said, brandishing a box of dumplings. "Heard you rattled some corporate cage today." Micah sank onto the lumpy couch, letting out a shaky laugh. "Understatement, Russ. They nearly tore me apart in there, but we found logs that proved Mr. Saunders didn't forge anything." Russell gave a whoop and sat next to him. "That's huge! That means the man's basically exonerated, right?" "Mostly. Helix will fight back. And if they drag out the process, they might still destroy him financially. Russell nodded grimly. That's standard tactics, endless motions, appeals, legal fees, so a defendant eventually crumbles. I see it all the time. Micah's phone buzzed vibrating across the arm of the couch. He didn't recognize the number. With a wary glance, he answered. Hello? A voice rasped on the other end. I need to speak with you. My name is Kyle Timmons. Micah's breath caught. Kyle? You? Where are you? Is this phone safe? Are you? Don't talk, just listen, Timmons said in a rushed whisper. I'm on a burner phone. Don't worry about me. You have some of my files, yes? Your sister brought them in. It was enough to keep Mr. Saunders from going to jail? Good, Timmons breathed, relief tinging his tone. But it's the tip of the iceberg. Helix is pulling strings in places you wouldn't imagine. Government contracts, clinical trial results. It's bigger than a single forgery. I have more, but I can't come forward without protection. Micah's heartbeat thundered. If you have more, you could blow the lid off Helix. You could save so many people who got framed. Or... I know, Timmons cut in, voice low, but they're watching everything. I think they have watchers at the bus station, at cheap motels. My guess is you're being watched too. Micah's mouth went dry. Across the apartment, Russell paused, dumpling half to his lips. He must have sensed Micah's tension. You want me to get the authorities involved? Michael asked Timmons. Be careful who you trust. Helix has a hand in local government. Some cops might tip them off. Let's do it another way. A friend of mine is in contact with a national consumer rights group. They can help release the evidence publicly, all at once. That's the only way Helix can't contain it. But I need time to compile everything securely. Just keep them busy, Micah. Keep the legal wheels in motion so they can't bury Mr. Saunders or vanish the evidence. Once I have the full package, we'll blow it open. Micah felt both fear and hope in equal measure. I'll keep them busy, but promise me you'll be safe, Timmons. A bitter chuckle. Safe is a relative term. Remember, Helix has high-powered lawyers and muscle if necessary. I'll be in touch. The line went dead. Micah lowered the phone, thoughts swirling. He relayed Timmons' message to Russell, who listened with growing alarm. Micah, you realize this is beyond just defending one client now. You're stepping into something that could shake corporate powers. You might want to vanish too. Micah leaned back against the couch. I can't run away. People deserve to know. Besides, he hesitated, a wave of sadness flickering across his face. I watched my mother get railroaded by a system that valued the rich man's testimony over hers. If I have a chance to undo that kind of wrongdoing, even a piece of it, I have to try. Russell put a hand on Micah's shoulder. I'm with you, whatever you need. Micah managed a tight smile. Thanks. Because this is going to get much worse before it gets better. That night, sleep came in fractured intervals, haunted by images of suits slamming courtroom doors, of Harlow's icy glare, and of Timmons on the run. Somewhere in that restless dreamscape, Michael recalled another snippet from a quote his mother had once read him. Fate whispers to the warrior, you cannot withstand the storm. The warrior whispers back, I am the storm. He might not have a law degree, might be no one in the eyes of the system, but if Helix tried to crush him, he would meet them head on. The next morning, Micah found a text from Mr. Saunders' phone number. We need to talk. Urgent. Please come to 24 Oakbridge Lane. Oakbridge Lane. That was an abandoned strip of warehouses near the older industrial district. Strange place for a meeting, but with Helix's lawyers looming, maybe Mr. Saunders felt safer there. Yet something prickled in the back of Micah's mind. He tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. So, with a mix of suspicion and concern, he set off. The bus ride took nearly 40 minutes. Micah hopped off near a chain-link fence. The sky overhead was heavy with clouds, and the wind whistled through broken warehouse windows. He double-checked the message. Yes, 24. Oakbridge was the second warehouse on the left, paint peeling from its corrugated steel exterior. He stepped inside carefully. It was dim, dust motes swirling in watery light from overhead skylights. "Mr. Saunders?" he called, voice echoing eerily. His footsteps scraped on the cracked concrete floor. A figure emerged from behind a stack of crates. Too tall and broad to be Mr. Saunders. Micah's heart seized when he recognized that expensive emerald coat. Delphine Harlow. She was flanked by two men in black suits, their expressions as cold as a winter dawn. "Good afternoon, Mr. Dempsey," Harlow greeted, her tone dangerously smooth. Micah's pulse hammered. "Where's Mr. Saunders?" Harlow gave a small shrug. "He's safe, I assume. I never summoned him here. But I needed a word with you. Privately." Micah realized the text had been a lure. He clenched his jaw, scanning for an exit. The two men closed in, blocking the path. Harlow paced slowly, her heels cracking on the concrete in time with Micah's pounding heart. "There's no need for theatrics," she purred. "We only want to talk. You've made quite a splash, brandishing stolen documents in open court, tarnishing Helix image." He forced himself not to shrink back. Stolen or not, they prove Helix framed Mr. Saunders. She arched one elegant brow. "Bold claim, but think of your future, Micah. You have no formal credentials, no reputation. Corporate law is a cruel world. Those who cross lines can find themselves blacklisted. No job, no prospect." "Is that a threat?" he demanded, voice tight. "An observation," Harlow replied, her smile sharp as glass. "But Helix is prepared to be generous. We can ensure your education is funded. We can open doors to certain law schools. In exchange, you'd simply drop your representation of Mr. Saunders and any crusade against Helix. We'll let him be found not guilty, hush it up quietly. Everyone walks away unscathed, including you." Micah felt a flush of anger. She was essentially bribing him to keep quiet, maybe guaranteeing Mr. Saunders a silent acquittal so Helix wouldn't face deeper scrutiny. He shook his head. "No, Mr. Saunders deserves a public clearing of his name, and the truth about Helix's manipulations needs to come out." Harlow's eyes flashed. She snapped her fingers, and one of the men stepped forward menacingly. "Perhaps you should reconsider. For your own safety." Micah's heart hammered. He forced his chin up. "I won't be bullied." The second man advanced. Suddenly, a strong hand gripped Micah's arm, twisting it behind him just enough to send a bolt of pain through his shoulder. Micah gasped, struggling. Harlow's face remained infuriatingly calm. "You see, Mr. Dempsey, noble intentions are worthless if you can't protect yourself. Wouldn't it be better for everyone if you just walked away?" He pressed his teeth together, forcing himself not to cry out. I can't," he rasped. "People's lives depend on this." She gave a regretful sigh and gestured to the thug holding Micah's arm. "Let him go." The man shoved Micah away. He stumbled, cradling his throbbing shoulder. Harlow lowered her voice. "This is your final courtesy warning. If you persist in painting Helix as criminals, your life will become quite difficult. Legal battles, personal threats. You may find your name on a docket for charges far more serious than anything you can handle. Consider carefully." Micah's chest constricted. He glared at them. "Tell your bosses I'm not for sale." A flicker of ice danced in her eyes. "You have no idea the storm you're courting, child." She spun on her heel, her henchman in tow, and left him in the half-darkness of the warehouse. His heart raced so violently it made him tremble. The wave of relief that they hadn't beaten him further was overshadowed by fresh terror. Helix would stop at nothing to protect itself. But fear was no excuse for silence, he reminded himself, recalling the lines Miss Timmons had said. "Justice can't breathe where fear presides." He inhaled shakily, then made his way back onto the street, nerves raw. An older couple passing by cast him a worried glance as he rubbed his sore shoulder. He gave them a fleeting nod, refusing to let shame or terror show. Harlow might have cornered him physically, but he refused to let her corner his mind. He found a battered payphone near the intersection. Hardly anyone used payphones anymore. Fewer cameras, fewer ways to track him. He deposited coins, calling Russell, letting him know what had happened. Russell was furious, urging him to file a police report. Michael, though, had doubts. If they've got local cops in their pockets, it might backfire, he said. We'll stay quiet for now. All that matters is we press on with the case. Maybe get a formal hearing, and if the evidence emerges publicly, Helix can't bury it. They agreed to meet that evening to regroup, strategize, and plan how to keep Mr. Saunders safe from similar intimidation. Micah left the payphone, tasting coppery adrenaline on his tongue. He had never realized how thin the line between courage and recklessness could feel. Later that night, back in Russell's apartment, Micah spread out the newly verified files on the coffee table. Russell hovered, scanning them. They definitely show that an executive-level IP inserted the incriminating data, making it look like Saunders was diverting funds. But it's all digital footprints. Prosecutors, well, honest prosecutors, would say that's powerful. Helix's team can claim it's been doctored. Micah gestured to scrawled notes referencing Helix higher-ups. Someone with clearance. Could be an entire group. Timmons said there's more. Possibly board-level corruption. If the bigger story breaks, the media might protect us somewhat. Public outcry can hamper Helix's intimidation. Russell's jaw set in determination. All right, let's get you a meeting with a decent journalist, someone who won't shy away from big corporate stories. Micah recalled a local investigative reporter named Fiona Ashland, known for digging into city corruption. She'd done an expose on a real estate mogul the year prior. Maybe her. If she sees the evidence, she could blow it wide open, he said. Russell gave a curt nod. I can't promise she'll buy it right away, but let's try. Before they could plan further, Micah's phone lit up with a text from Mr. Saunders. The older man was frightened. Helix outside investigators had left messages for him, offering hush money in exchange for dropping any talk of misconduct. Micah assured him to stand firm. Meanwhile, a swirl of dread mounted. Helix was moving fast to neutralize threats. Russell placed a gentle hand on Micah's arm. Remember, you don't have to do this alone. You're standing for something huge, but you can share the burden. Micah closed his eyes briefly, exhaustion seeping into every fiber of his being. Then he opened them with renewed purpose. Russell, I'm scared, but I owe it to everyone Helix is trampling. Russell pulled him into a brief brotherly hug. Then let's do this. Fortune favors the bold, right? Or was that fortune favors those who sue the unscrupulous corporate giant? Micah couldn't help but let a small laugh slip. A memory flickered of his mother quoting a line from some philosopher. To see what is right and not to do it is lack of courage. In a voice trembling with conviction, he murmured, We'll find a way. Within 2 days, Micah had arranged a clandestine meeting with Fiona Ashland in a local diner. It was the kind of place with squeaky vinyl booths and a neon sign that buzzed overhead. At one corner table, Micah waited, scanning faces while nursing a cup of coffee he didn't really want. When the door jingled open, Fiona slipped in, wearing a modest gray blazer and carrying a small notepad. She spotted Micah, approached, and settled into the booth across from him. Her expression was that of a weary reporter who had seen a bit too much. Still, her eyes were sharp. You're younger than I expected, she said quietly, stirring a spoon through her tea. Micah inhaled. I've been hearing that a lot lately, but hopefully I have something you'll want to see. He opened his bag, passing her a folder with the verified logs. Fiona flipped through it, her brow creasing. Are you telling me Helix Solutions actually orchestrated a frame job to pin wrongdoing on an employee? She looked up. If I publish something like that and it's not airtight, my paper gets sued into oblivion. Micah nodded grimly. I get it. But I also have leads on deeper corruption, possibly medical trial manipulation for profit. Helix has the money to smother lawsuits. People inside are scared. Some have disappeared. I can connect you with them if we can ensure anonymity. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I've sniffed around Helix before. They own half the local lobbyists. They tried to kill a smaller story I wrote, threatened to drag me into court for defamation. And now you want me to paint a target on my chest? The dryness in his throat made it hard to speak. I can't force you, but people are getting bullied or ruined, and you know how these cycles of power keep going if no one stands up. Fiona set down the folder. She sighed. Show me everything, not just the highlight reel. Every piece of evidence, plus the real story behind it. If I think it's strong enough, I'll pitch it to my editor. If we can't get traction locally, I'll shop it to national outlets. Micah let out a slow breath of relief. Thank you. That's all I can ask. She nodded. I do this job because the truth matters. But be prepared. If we publish, Helix will come for you. He gave a hollow laugh. They already have, Ms. Ashland. But I can't walk away. She studied him more closely, as though reassessing. You know, she said softly, there's an old saying, we make a living by what we get, we make a life by what we give. Winston Churchill, I believe. Sounds like you've decided to give everything to protect others. I respect that. But be careful. Micah swallowed against the lump in his throat. I will. They parted ways in the diner's parking lot. After she drove off, Micah looked up at the broad, restless sky. A swirl of tension twisted inside him. This was the biggest gamble of his life, banking on Timmons eventually surfacing with damning evidence, hoping a reporter could turn it into unstoppable momentum. If it worked, Helix would stand exposed. If it backfired, the cost might be devastating. Court resumed the following week. By then, Helix had unleashed a barrage of motions, including a demand to disqualify Micah from representing Mr. Saunders. Judge Huang scheduled a hearing on the motion. The courtroom was jammed with spectators and media. The stage was set for a showdown that felt more like David versus Goliath. Micah braced himself as the hearing began. Delphine Harlow stood, posture radiating confidence. Your Honor, she began, we believe Mr. Dempsey's lack of credentials not only jeopardizes this process, but also underscores that the so-called evidence is unreliable. Any documents introduced by him have not gone through standard legal channels. Judge Huang gave her a measured look. The authenticity of the documents is not in question. We have an independent forensic report verifying them. The question is whether Mr. Dempsey can continue as an advocate. Prosecutor Martel stepped up. We argue that this is a dangerous precedent. A young man with no formal education in law stepping into major corporate litigation. Judge Huang turned to Micah. Mr. Dempsey, do you have a response? Micah rose, ignoring the dryness in his throat. Yes, Your Honor. Our laws allow for pro se representation, and Mr. Saunders is effectively representing himself with me as an advisor. He is within his rights to designate an agent or assistant. At every stage, we have complied with evidentiary standards. The real issue is not my qualifications, but the fact Helix doesn't want these documents to see daylight. A subdued ripple passed through the gallery. Harlow's jaw tightened. She retorted, This is not about burying evidence. It's about preventing a spectacle that undermines our judicial system. Judge Huang rubbed the bridge of her nose. Indeed, this court is cautious about unorthodox representation. However, Mr. Dempsey, you have, up to this point, shown that you are prepared and that you genuinely aim to defend Mr. Saunders. Until the defendant himself withdraws your authority or the court deems you incompetent, you may continue, subject to close scrutiny. A hush fell. Micah's heartbeat thundered with relief. Even the air felt momentarily lighter. Harlow's lips curved into a thin, forced smile. "We respect the court's decision. Then let us proceed. We've found a new witness who can clarify the chain of evidence." She gestured to the side doors. A well-dressed man in a crisp navy suit came forward. His hair was slicked back and he carried himself with a hint of arrogance. "Your Honor," Harlow said, "this is Mark White, Helix's Senior Director of Finance. He can address these allegations of tampering." Micah tensed. Senior Director of Finance? Possibly the one who orchestrated the forging. White was sworn in. Harlow began by asking him to confirm his role. He launched into an explanation of how Helix's data servers had never shown any unauthorized activity. Then, in a measured tone, he insinuated that the logs Timmons had stolen were doctored beyond recognition. Micah's frustration rose. "You're saying Timmons fabricated the logs?" White gave a smooth nod. He was disgruntled. He left after being overlooked for promotion. It's entirely plausible he created these phony logs to seek revenge. Micah clenched his jaw. "What about our forensic verification?" White shrugged. "One can manipulate server logs if they possess the necessary know-how. Independent forensics only confirms that the files come from Helix's servers, not that Timmons didn't alter them afterward. Any good hacker can rewrite digital footprints." The cunning shift in White's stance was not lost on Judge Huang, who frowned. But Harlow quickly asked the judge to enter White's testimony as a direct contradiction to Timmons' logs. Suddenly they had a classic he said, she said scenario. The blow threatened to undermine Micah's entire foundation. As the hearing wore on, White maintained composure, weaving a plausible narrative of a vengeful ex-employee forging evidence. By the end, Micah could see the judge's uncertainty. The new testimony might cast enough doubt to muddy the waters. Helix was adept at weaving illusions. When the hearing ended, the court was again recessed. Judge Huang announced she would consider whether additional forensics or depositions were needed. Micah stood by the wooden rail, breathing heavily. Harlow approached, wearing that controlled smirk. "Told you we'd fight back," she murmured. "And that was only the beginning, Mr. Dempsey." Micah refused to give her the satisfaction of a reply. He turned on his heel, his mind already calculating how to prove White was lying. He needed Timmons. He needed more insiders. Otherwise, Helix's story might overshadow the truth. As he stepped outside, drizzling rain dampened the city streets. In that gentle downpour, he realized that if Helix cast Timmons as an embittered ex-employee, the public might believe them. They had the resources to produce experts who could sow just enough doubt, and from the hush in the corridor as he walked away, Micah knew their strategy was working. He refused to yield. "Stand your ground," he reminded himself. "Stand it for all the times you couldn't save the ones you loved." Late that night, alone in the back office of the community center once more, Micah scrolled through every piece of Helix's publicly filed documents. His eyes stung from strain. Outside, thunder rumbled softly. He was about to call it quits when his phone buzzed with a single text from an unknown number. "They're lying. Meet me behind Prescott's Bakery at midnight." He stared at the text. Could it be Timmons or some other whistleblower? It reeked of possible danger, a trap like the warehouse fiasco. But if it was genuine, he couldn't ignore it. He typed quickly, "Who is this?" The only reply was, "If you want to know the truth about White, come alone." Micah's heart pounded. Weighing the risk, he decided to go. He told no one but Russell, leaving a note on the desk detailing where he was headed in case things went awry. Then he slipped into the stormy darkness. Prescott's Bakery was a small, shuttered storefront in the older district, known for its bread loaves by day, but at night the alley behind it was deserted. Rain slicked the pavement, reflecting pale streetlights. Micah approached, adrenaline surging with every step. Then a figure emerged from the shadows beneath a broken awning. A woman, late 30s or so, with short hair plastered to her forehead by the rain, stepped forward. She wore a gray windbreaker and looked around nervously. "Are you Micah Dempsey?" He nodded, heart in his throat. "Who are you?" "I can't give you my real name. Call me Ellen. I used to work, for Helix. I saw you in court. I recognize the logs Timmons leaked. I have more. And I know Mark White is behind half the tampering." Thunder rattled overhead. Micah, struggling to keep from shivering, leaned in. "Can you prove it?" A flash of determination crossed her features. She lifted a small thumb drive. "These are Mark White's personal communications from a corporate intranet channel he thought was untraceable. He's boasted about making scapegoats out of mid-level staff. My job was to scrub the logs. I quit after I realized the scale of it." Micah's eyes widened with hope. "This is massive. Will you testify?" Her gaze wavered with fear. "I don't know. Helix has powerful connections. But I can't keep silent. People are getting ruined. Timmons tried, Saunders tried. If exposing White cripples their story, it might break their hold on the narrative." Micah carefully took the thumb drive, trying to shield it from the rain beneath his jacket. "We'll protect you if you testify. The court can grant witness protection, maybe. We can at least push for it." She let out a shuddery breath. "I'm terrified, but I'm more terrified of letting them keep hurting innocent people." Micah gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, Ellen. I promise to use this carefully." Another crack of thunder made him glance nervously around. "We should go. This area might not be safe." She nodded, looked at him with gratitude shining through her fear, then rushed off into the dark. Micah stood there a moment, drenched, heart swirling with disbelief. Helix's facade was cracking faster now, with a second whistleblower stepping up. He had a new piece of evidence: direct communications from White's private channel. If it proved his complicity, the case might tip dramatically in Mr. Saunders' favor. Yet, as Micah hurried away, one thought chilled him. If Helix discovered Ellen's identity, she could face real danger. He'd have to move fast, protect her identity as best he could, and bring this forward in court. The rain hammered on, the city's gloom brightening briefly with flickers of lightning. Micah pressed the thumb drive to his chest, both dreading and anticipating the storm that was about to break over Helix's head. Morning rays found Micah once again outside courtroom A, waiting for the judge to reconvene the hearing on motions. With him was Russell, who cast concerned glances in Micah's direction. "You okay? You look like you hardly slept." Micah offered a half smile. "I found something big last night, another whistleblower. She gave me direct communications from Mark White, the Helix exec. If we can authenticate them, it'll blow his testimony out of the water." Russell's eyes widened. "Then let's get that admitted, quick." The bailiff called them in. The tension inside the room was tangible. Delphine Harlow and Prosecutor Martel were present, Mark White seated behind them with a calm expression. Mr. Saunders sat near Micah, wringing his hands nervously. Judge Huang arrived, calling everyone to order. Micah came forward, explaining that a new witness had provided relevant communications from Helix's intranet, which allegedly showed Mark White orchestrating the framing of employees. Harlow frowned, rising to her full height. "We object, Your Honor. There's no chain of custody on this so-called evidence." Judge Huang's expression was unreadable. "Mr. Dempsey, do you have a statement regarding authenticity?" Micah's voice wavered only slightly. "Your Honor, I ask for immediate forensic review, similar to the previous logs. Our whistleblower is fearful of reprisals and requests anonymity until we can ensure her safety. The content indicates Mark White boasted about manipulating data logs to implicate employees, naming Mr. Saunders specifically." A hush. White's composure cracked just a fraction, a muscle ticking at his jaw. Harlow exchanged a tight-lipped look with him. The judge motioned for the bailiff to retrieve the thumb drive. We will recess for a short forensic examination. Please, remain available. Micah exhaled. Another countdown. If the data proved genuine, White's entire testimony could be systematically dismantled. They waited a painful 2 hours. Micah and Mr. Saunders paced the corridor while Russell tried to calm them with encouraging words. Meanwhile, across the hall, Harlow and Martell conferred in hushed, tense conversation. Mark White avoided eye contact with everyone, gazing out a window with feigned indifference. Finally, the side room door opened. The same IT specialist walked briskly into the judge's chambers carrying a report. After another 15 minutes, the bailiff emerged and gestured for everyone to return to courtroom A. The entire scene felt surreal, hearts thrumming with anticipation. Judge Huang read from the top page. The forensic team has reviewed the new files. We see no evidence of tampering, and the communications do appear to originate from Helix's internal network under Mark White's credentials. Several of the messages reference forging financial data, implicating lower-level employees, most notably Roger Saunders. In wrongdoing, a hush fell that was deeper than before. Micah could almost taste the tension, thick and electric. White's face paled noticeably. Prosecutor Martell swallowed, adjusting his tie. Harlow's gaze hardened into a glare that cut like a razor. Judge Huang continued. In these communications, Mr. White appears to detail steps to deflect scrutiny by blaming unsuspecting employees. One message states, "We just need the right fall guy. Saunders is too quiet to notice. Shift the logs, let him take the heat. Helix walks away clean." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Micah caught a glimpse of Mr. Saunders trembling, lips parted in shock and tentative relief. The entire premise that Timmons was a lone forger was unraveling right here. Harlow stood, clearing her throat. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge the communication is from Mark White's account, we must consider the possibility that it was used without his knowledge." Judge Huang glowered. "That's a serious claim, Ms. Harlow. Do you have evidence?" Harlow faltered. "We request time to investigate." "That request is noted," the judge said. "However, in the meantime, this court must consider the strong possibility that Mr. White lied under oath regarding the authenticity of the previous logs. This is perjury, Ms. Harlow." A ripple of shock and excitement coursed through the crowd. White stepped forward, stammering. I never wrote those messages, Your Honor. Someone must have—" "Sit down, Mr. White," the judge said, her voice cool. "We will not have further outbursts. I will order a deeper investigation. But, for the record, these newly authenticated communications contradict your sworn testimony. Furthermore, they provide strong grounds to believe Roger Saunders was framed by Helix executives." At that, Ms. Harlow's perfect mask cracked for an instant. She spun toward White, eyes blazing. The synergy in the court shifted. Helix's defense was crumbling. Micah's heart soared, though he didn't show it outwardly. They weren't at the end yet, but they just landed a staggering blow. Judge Huang hammered her gavel. "Unless the prosecution and Helix can supply compelling reasons otherwise, the charges against Mr. Saunders will be dropped, and we may consider charges against Mr. White for perjury and conspiracy." A moment of glorious silence, then an eruption of stunned chatter. For Mr. Saunders, it was as if a mountain had been lifted from his shoulders. He nearly collapsed into the chair, burying his face in his trembling hands. Micah moved to stand behind him, resting a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We did it," he whispered, voice wavering with emotion. Mr. Saunders raised watery eyes. "My family, we're free," he laughed weakly, halfway to tears. Across the aisle, Harlow and White conferred in harsh whispers. Martell stared at them, apparently blindsided. The next few minutes were a blur of legal formalities and stunned exclamations. Finally, the hearing ended. Mr. Saunders was free to go, with a promise that all charges would be formally dismissed pending final procedural steps. As the crowd spilled into the hall, a reporter pressed a microphone at Micah. Is this the end of Helix manipulations? Does Mr. Saunders plan to sue for damages? And do you plan to become a real lawyer? Micah felt a dizzy, warm rush. For so long he'd battled to be heard. Now cameras clamored for his words. He steadied himself. I'm not sure what Mr. Saunders will do next. That's his decision. As for Helix, I have reason to believe there's more to uncover. This victory is just one step toward holding them fully accountable. Prosecutor Martel shot him a look of pure frustration, clearly seeing his open and shut case unravel into a fiasco. Nearby, Delphine Harlow tried to escape the flurry of microphones, no longer her composed self. She fired Micah one last venomous glare before vanishing around a corner. Once the corridor cleared, Mr. Saunders approached, tears glistening. Son, I don't know how to repay you. They nearly destroyed me, but you gave me my life back. Micah shook his head. You don't own me. Just promise that if you see others being mistreated, you'll stand up for them too. The older man's voice choked. I will. Then he took Micah's hand, pressing it between his own in a gesture of deep gratitude. After one last whispered thank you, he walked away, free to rebuild his family's future. Micah sagged against a wall, letting his eyes close. Russell bounded up, enveloping Micah in a joyful hug. You absolute legend. Did you see Harlow's face? I wish I took a photo. Micah let out a shaky laugh, relief and exhaustion mingling. One down, a whole crooked empire to go. Russell grinned. If you keep this up, you'll dethrone them all. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Micah murmured, though a flicker of determination warmed him from within. Behind them, a swirl of curious onlookers parted, revealing Fiona Ashland, the investigative reporter. She approached with a thin smile. I caught the hearing. Seems you've struck Helix a real blow. Congratulations. Mind if I ask a few more questions about that bigger scandal you hinted at? Micah straightened. Sure. Let's find a quieter spot. They ended up in a lounge near the courthouse, an out-of-the-way hallway with a couple of vending machines humming softly. Fiona pulled out her notepad. Russell hovered close, listening. We now know Helix pinned the blame on Saunders, Fiona began. But you mentioned possible deeper misconduct. Clinical trial fraud, maybe? Micah hesitated, glancing around as though Helix watchers might leap out any second. Kyle Timmons suggested there are documents regarding Helix forging test results on certain medications to push them through FDA approvals faster. Fiona's eyes widened. That's huge. If they messed with trial data, they'd put public health at risk. You realize this would attract federal attention. That's the goal, Micah confirmed. Timmons wants to reveal everything, but he's afraid for his life. If I can keep Helix's legal team busy with the Saunders matter, maybe Timmons has time to compile the rest. Fiona scribbled notes. And your new whistleblower, this Ellen? She confirmed white-orchestrated scapegoating. Did she mention the medical trials? Ellen, not yet. She worked in data management, so it's possible, but for now, she's terrified. Fiona set her pen down, scanning Micah's tired face. I can run a piece that references these allegations, but I need something more concrete if I'm going to blow it open. People have threatened me before, but Helix is next level powerful. So, if you unearth more records, I'll share, Micah promised. She gave him a somber look. This story could be bigger than any local scandal. If we do it right, it could change the conversation about corporate accountability. If we do it wrong, we get destroyed legally or physically. Russell interjected. We'll do it right. Count on it. Fiona nodded, slipping her notepad into her bag. All right, keep me posted. She placed a reassuring hand on Micah's forearm. What you've done, exposing them for Saunders' sake, it matters. He nodded, a wave of humility hitting him. I just don't want anyone else to face what my mother faced. With that, Fiona left, footsteps echoing. Micah and Russell exchanged a glance, the magnitude of the path ahead like a storm cloud on the horizon. The next few days were calmer in one sense. Mr. Saunders' charges were officially dropped. Local media jumped on the story of the kid champion who unmasked corporate tampering. People recognized Micah on the street, commending him or gawking. But beneath the surface calm was a seething undercurrent of tension. Helix top brass was silent, making no public statements. Timmins remained hidden, sending only cryptic texts to Micah that he was gathering the final puzzle pieces. One evening, Micah sat in Russell's living room going through a stack of old newspapers for any mention of Helix's previous controversies. Russell read over his shoulder. "Look at this. 3 years ago, they were accused of bribing a state senator. The case vanished for lack of evidence." Micah clenched his jaw. "Sounds like their usual mode. Bury the truth?" A sudden ring from the door buzzer made them jump. Russell rose warily, peering through the peephole. Then he cracked the door. A young man with sandy hair and a harried expression stood on the threshold, glancing over his shoulder. "Russ, it's safe," the man said, stepping inside quickly. Micah realized it was Russell's friend from law school, Noel Friedman, who sometimes clerked at the district courthouse. Russell locked the door behind him. "Noel, what's wrong? You look spooked." Noel shook water from his jacket. "I just overheard something in Judge Deng's chambers. He was talking to a Helix attorney about possible sealed warrants, or I'm not entirely sure, but Helix might be trying to get a quiet court order to seize certain documents. Possibly from you, Micah." Micah's heart dropped. "They're trying a backdoor approach. With a judge they can influence?" Noel nodded, lowering his voice. "If they get a sealed warrant, they can legally raid your place, confiscate your computer, your phone, anything with Helix's data. Then you'd face charges for possession of stolen corporate material. They'd bury you in litigation." Micah slumped onto the couch. "So they can't win in the open, so they're sneaking through the system. Great." Russell paced. "We can't let them blindside us. We need to hide anything incriminating. Or rather, everything that incriminates Helix. We can't risk them grabbing." Micah exhaled shakily. "We'll back up the data, and I can store the physical copies with Fiona or Timmins. But if Timmins is exposed, it's more dangerous for him. Fiona might be the safer bet. She works with a major newspaper. They have protocols." Noel cleared his throat. "Do it fast. This might happen within a day or two. I'll try to see if there's a motion date, but I can't promise anything. I risked my own job sharing this." Micah grasped Noel's hand in gratitude. "Thank you. You might have just saved us." Noel smiled wanly. "I just hate seeing powerful interests corrupt the law. Good luck." He slipped out into the hallway, leaving behind an uneasy hush. Russell turned to Micah, expression resolute. "I'll get the external drives. You gather the physical documents. Let's move them tonight. Stash them in Fiona's safe deposit box at the newspaper's building," she offered once. "Remember?" Micah nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I remember. Let's do it." They worked late into the night, scanning and encrypting data, stowing the physical copies in a battered suitcase. By 2 a.m., they had moved everything to the back seat of Russell's dented old sedan. Russell drove through quiet streets, occasionally checking the rear-view mirror for suspicious cars. They found Fiona waiting at a side entrance of the newspaper's building, letting them in. Under flickering fluorescent lights, they transferred the files into a secure, locked cabinet. Fiona watched, with tension etched across her face. "Let them come for me if they want," she said softly. "The paper has lawyers who won't back down easily, and we have a digital trail to prove we didn't steal this data. Whistleblowers gave it to us." Micah felt gratitude well up. "Thank you." She nodded. "I told you I'm in this. We'll keep it safe." Outside, the night was calm, but the wind carried a certain electricity. Russ drove them home, and Micah stared out the passenger window, heart pounding at every passing headlight. He recalled a quote from the Stoics: "The greater the difficulty, the more glory in surmounting it." He whispered that to himself, needing the reassurance. As predicted, the very next afternoon, two men in suits arrived at Russell's apartment building while Micah was out picking up groceries. Russell spotted them through a window. They had official badges, along with a piece of paper that looked suspiciously like a search warrant. Russell met them in the hallway, feigning annoyance but cooperating. The men swept through the place, rummaging in drawers, scanning laptops, searching for anything Helix. They found nothing. After an hour, they left, frustrated. When Micah returned, Russell filled him in. The warrant was real, signed under seal by some judge claiming probable cause that we possessed stolen corporate secrets. They left empty. Micah's breath whooshed out. We dodged a bullet. If we hadn't moved everything, we'd be in handcuffs by now. Russell nodded solemnly. I guess that means we're messing with the big leagues. Micah's shoulders sagged from the weight of it all. Helix was indeed pulling every lever. But Timmons' words echoed. Once I have the full package, we'll blow it open. Maybe that was their only real solution, a massive public reveal that overshadowed Helix's intimidation tactics. The dawn sky was painted in pale gold when Micah's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered warily. Timmons' voice came through, hushed yet urgent. Micah, I've compiled everything. The medical trials, the hush money to politicians, the scapegoat patterns. Thousands of pages. I'm ready to release them, but we need a press conference or a major publication lined up so Helix can't just kill the story. Micah's pulse skyrocketed. We have a journalist, Fiona Ashland, local. She can get it to a national wire. Perfect, Timmons said, relief rippling through his tone. Let's do it tomorrow at noon, at the steps of City Hall. I'll give you a drive with the documents. Fiona can broadcast and I'll appear if that ensures maximum impact. Then I'll request whistleblower protection from the feds. Micah's mind spun. That's dangerous for you. A hollow laugh. Danger's part of my life now, but I can't hide forever while they keep hurting others. I have to stand up. Micah blinked back, sudden tears, thinking of his mother, who had never gotten that chance. All right, Timmons, I'll set it up. They hashed out details quickly, adrenaline fueling every syllable. Once the call ended, Micah reached for Russell, explaining Timmons' plan. Soon Fiona was on board, excited yet tense. At exactly noon the next day, they gathered on the wide, iconic steps of City Hall, overshadowed by tall stone columns. Rain threatened overhead, but the crowd was thick. Reporters, local activists, curious bystanders. Micah had alerted them that significant revelations about Helix Solutions would be announced. Fiona had teased the press on social media. Local corporate giant embroiled in new scandal. Whistleblower to speak. Micah stood off to one side, scanning the sea of faces. He finally spotted Timmons wearing a baseball cap and hooded jacket, inching through the throng. Their eyes locked, and Timmons gave a small nod. Fiona quickly ushered him toward a makeshift podium with a cluster of microphones. On the periphery, Micah saw a few stern-faced individuals who might be Helix private security, scowling from the edges. Timmons approached the microphones, voice trembling as he greeted the press. My name is Kyle Timmons. I was a financial analyst for Helix Solutions. Today I bring forward evidence that Helix orchestrated data tampering, bribed officials, and manipulated clinical trials for profit. These documents, he held up a thick binder, detail every major instance over the past 5 years. A murmur of shock rippled through the assembled crowd. Cameras flashed. Timmons inhaled a shaky breath. I've been in hiding, fearing for my safety. But with the help of this young man, Micah Dempsey, and reporter Fiona Ashland, I realized that sunlight is the best defense. Timmons, a reporter shouted. Why do you claim Helix manipulated clinical data? Timmons turned, scanning the reporters. In 2019, Helix faced potential failure of a crucial heart medication trial. They falsified positive results, endangering patients. Dozens suffered complications because the drug was rushed to market. This is only the beginning. At those words, the crowd erupted in gasps. More frantic questions flew. Timmons pressed a thumb drive into Fiona's hand. Everything is here. I'm releasing it publicly, uploading it to multiple online repositories. Helix can't silence all of them. In the back, Micah could see tension boiling among a few onlookers. Then a flash of emerald, Delphine Harlow flanked by a pair of imposing men. She must have followed them, though how quickly she managed to appear was unnerving. She watched Timmons with open hostility. Micah's heart pounded, but Timmons carried on. I request whistleblower protection from federal authorities. I stand ready to testify in any investigation. He paused, eyes shining with conviction. I also want to say to those who tried to keep me silent, you can't muzzle the truth forever. The reporters shouted a barrage of questions. Timmons stepped back. Fiona took the mic, urging them to check the links that would be published within the hour. She promised thorough coverage, including interviews, evidence logs, and more. The magnitude of the revelations was staggering. If Timmons' claims held up, Helix faced fines, lawsuits, maybe even criminal charges for top executives. Micah's gaze darted toward Harlow. She stood near the statue at the bottom of the steps, face pale as she spoke into her phone. Possibly calling Helix higher-ups. Her eyes flicked to Micah in utter hatred, then she spun on her heel and vanished into the crowd. He let out a breath, shoulders sagging. She couldn't stop the story now. It was in the open. The best she could do was damage control, but an avalanche of truth was about to bury them. Russell pressed a hand to Micah's shoulder in wordless congratulations. Fiona escorted Timmons away from the podium, shielding him from the crush of cameras. Micah joined them, adrenaline surging. They'd done it. Helix's stranglehold was about to be broken, or at least severely weakened. A middle-aged woman with streaks of gray in her hair moved close to Micah. She had tears in her eyes as she whispered, "My husband died after taking a Helix medication. No one believed me when I said the drug was rushed. If this is true, thank you." Micah's chest tightened. He placed a comforting hand on her arm, at a loss for words. "I'm so sorry," he finally managed. "I hope you get justice." Her trembling nod spoke volumes. They parted ways, leaving him with a swirl of heartbreak and relief. If one life lost could be explained by Helix's negligence, how many more had suffered in silence? In the days that followed, the city, and soon the nation, grieved from Timmons' revelations. Major news outlets picked up the story. Investors pulled away from Helix. The FBI reportedly opened an inquiry. Delphine Harlow was nowhere to be seen publicly, rumored to be negotiating with Helix's board on a salvage plan. Mark White was indicted for conspiracy and perjury. Rumor had it he was turning on other executives in an attempt to secure a plea deal. Mr. Saunders, fully exonerated, announced a lawsuit against Helix for damages. He insisted Micah be recognized as his representative. Though a real attorney had to sign the official documents, the entire city knew Micah was the one who had saved him. One afternoon, Micah visited Mr. Saunders at his small suburban home. The older man's wife served them tea in the cozy living room. Photos of a life nearly destroyed by Helix treachery now lined the mantel. Birthdays, anniversaries, bright memories. Mr. Saunders took Micah's hand. "You returned hope to us," he said, voice thick with emotion. "Whenever you need anything, we're here." Micah smiled softly, tears prickling behind his eyes. "Thank you. Just keep living free and happy. That's all I need." Mr. Saunders' wife pressed her lips together, overwhelmed with gratitude. "You're an angel, Micah." He flushed, feeling undeserving of such praise. He rose to leave, noticing their cat winding around his ankles, purring. The normalcy of the scene warmed him. Outside, the sun shone on a neighborhood that once seemed so ordinary, now tinged with new beginnings. Weeks passed, and Helix's downfall continued. Federal agents raided corporate offices, seizing computers, leading executives away in handcuffs. Timmons testified before a grand jury, unveiling every concealed scheme. Fiona's articles circulated widely. Public outrage soared. In a surreal twist, even some senators praised the young man who had sparked the collapse of a corporate giant. Micah's phone rang incessantly with interview requests, law schools offering scholarships, and nonprofits wanting him as a spokesperson for legal reform. He often retreated to a quiet corner of Russell's living room, reminding himself how easy it would be for illusions of grandeur to take root. He was just Micah, a 19-year-old who had lost his mother to injustice. He recalled her voice, "Don't let success overshadow compassion." That memory guided him. One morning, while reading about Helix's newly filed bankruptcy proceedings, Micah's phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. When he picked up, a gentle female voice said, "Micah Dempsey?" "Yes, that's me. This is Deputy Warden Baker from the Pine Glen facility. I was told to pass along a message. You once wrote to us about your mother's case. Our records show, well, we have some of her personal items. We found them after clearing a storage area. I thought you might want them." Micah's breath caught. "My mother's items. I thought they were destroyed." "They were mislabeled. We're sorry. Would you like us to mail them, or—" He swallowed back a surge of emotion. "I'll come get them." That afternoon, Micah made the trip to Pine Glen, the facility where his mother had served her final days. The sight of it still made his stomach twist. Tall fences, razor wire, the cold facade of hopelessness. But in the deputy warden's cramped office, he was handed a small cardboard box containing a few personal effects: a worn hardcover journal, a crocheted shawl, and a pair of postcards. Micah gently lifted the journal. Flipping through, he discovered that his mother had written daily thoughts, notes of encouragement, quotes she cherished. At one point, near the end, her handwriting grew shaky, but the words resonated with unwavering hope. "The system may have forgotten me, but I believe justice lives on in my son's heart." Tears blurred his vision. He clutched the journal to his chest. This was more precious than anything. She had believed in justice, even as it failed her. Now, that belief radiated from beyond her grave. He stepped outside, wind stirring the pages as he carefully tucked them away. Leaning against the prison's wall, he lifted his gaze to the wide sky. "Mom," he whispered, voice catching, "we're bringing justice back. I'm sorry I couldn't save you, but I won't let them break anyone else." Time rolled on, and in a swirl of events, Helix officially collapsed under the weight of lawsuits, federal investigations, and public condemnation. Delphine Harlow lost her license to practice law amid findings of unethical conduct. Mark White sat in a detention center awaiting trial, and for the countless victims, families of patients harmed by Helix's fraudulent drugs, employees wrongly accused, local politicians strong-armed into silence, there was finally a chance for vindication. The city shifted its focus to legislative reforms. Journalists hailed the fiasco as a turning point against corporate exploitation, and quietly in the background, Micah stood watching it all unfold, recognized as a catalyst, yet uncertain about his own future. One crisp afternoon, he received an acceptance letter in the mail. A law school, a prestigious one, offered him a full scholarship. The letter praised his remarkable demonstration of legal aptitude and moral commitment. Micah stared at the embossed seal, heartbeat loud in his ears. He called Russell, who picked up on the second ring. "Russ, they offered me a spot, full ride." Russell whooped. "Dude, that's incredible! You can become an actual lawyer. Then no one will question your legitimacy again." Micah sat heavily on the couch, letter crinkling in his hand. "Yeah, it's surreal." He thought of his mother's journal, the quotes she scribbled, the final lines about trusting him to champion truth. He thought about Mr. Saunders, about Timmons, about all the whistleblowers who risked everything. Maybe law school was the logical path. But a part of him wondered if the real power was in the people who dared to stand up without a license, who refused to let bureaucracies define their worth. Russell's voice crackled over the line. "Hello? Earth to Micah?" Micah smiled softly. "I'm here, just thinking. I think I'll do it. For my mom, for everyone. I want to be the kind of lawyer who actually fights for real people, not just billable hours." Russell's warmth spread through the phone. "That's the best news I've heard all day. So proud of you." Months later, on a bright and blustery autumn morning, Micah stood at a podium in a small auditorium on the campus of Riverside University's law school. He'd been invited to speak at an orientation event for new and prospective students, many of them middle-aged professionals returning to school, along with wide-aimed undergrads. The room hummed with curiosity. Standing there, he remembered the first time he'd stepped in front of a judge, how the sneers and disapproval had shaken him. Now he felt calm, if a bit emotional. He greeted the crowd and shared a piece of his story, how his mother's wrongful conviction had pushed him to study law on his own, how he'd uncovered a corporate conspiracy. He watched the audience's expressions shift from skepticism to awe, as he spoke of courage and unwavering purpose. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Some of you might wonder if one person can stand against powerful forces. I'm living proof that you can. But it's rarely easy. The system we have is flawed, but it also holds potential for good if we don't give up on it." A tall woman in the front row dabbed her eyes. Micah realized many of them had faced their own struggles. Layoffs, broken marriages, health crises. The lines on their faces spoke of life's battles. His heart resonated with empathy for them. He concluded softly, "A quote my mother loved was this: 'It's never too late to be what you might have been.'" That's George Eliot. She believed that no matter your age, background, or mistakes, you can choose to make a difference. Don't let fear or cynicism stop you. "I'm 19. I had every reason to fail." But we succeed when we fight for each other, not just for ourselves. Applause thundered. In the front row, a man with graying temples nodded fervently, tears in his eyes. Micah bowed his head, grateful beyond words. As the crowd stood, a wave of emotion rippled through the room, people caught up in the sense that their own possibilities were bigger than they'd realized. When the auditorium emptied, Micah stepped outside into the crisp air. Golden leaves spiraled from the trees, dancing in the breeze. He felt a pang in his chest, missing his mother, wishing she could see him now. But perhaps she was present in some invisible way, cheering for him. Russell jogged over, beaming. "Great speech. You had them in the palm of your hand." Micah gave a self-conscious laugh. "I just spoke the truth." Russell's voice turned contemplative. "Remember, you still have a life to live, not just battles to fight." Micah nodded. "I'll try. But I suspect the battles aren't over. There's always another Helix, another injustice. I just hope we've opened some eyes." Russell placed an arm around his shoulders, guiding him toward the campus courtyard where students mingled. "You opened more than eyes, Micah. You opened hearts." They walked in companionable silence, leaves crunching underfoot. In the back of his mind, Micah reflected on all that had transpired, from standing in that first courtroom, ridiculed as a kid with no license, to unraveling a powerhouse corporation, to now taking steps toward a legal career. He felt both young and ancient, carrying the scars of a life thrust into the ring before its time. Yet, as he gazed at the horizon, a gentle warmth filled his chest. People might be born into systems that seem insurmountable, but they can also choose to become the antidote to that powerlessness. In that choice lay a wellspring of hope. He inhaled the cool autumn air, letting the sun rest on his face, and in that quiet moment, he whispered to the memory of his mother, "We did it, Mom. We found the light in all that darkness." The breeze carried a gentle hush, as if in agreement. In time, Micah would graduate, pass the bar, and become a lawyer who championed underdogs all across the state. He would tackle wrongful convictions and corporate overreach, forging alliances with journalists and other activists who believed in a fairer world. Some might call it naive, others might call it unstoppable. For Micah, it was simply the path he was meant to walk. Before long, his name became synonymous with resilient advocacy, a beacon for those who felt powerless. Middle-aged clients who had lost faith in the system found themselves comforted by his tenacity. Younger activists idolized him, seeing in him a testament that age and credentials meant little compared to moral clarity. And every now and then, in the hush of a newly quieted courtroom, he'd recall standing in the shadows of that system as a 19-year-old, terrified yet unwavering. In the final measure, the journey was about more than corporate scandals or legal triumphs. It was about proving that compassion and courage, armed with truth, can reshape even the most imbalanced playing field. That is the lesson Micah carried forward, offering it freely to all who came seeking help, never forgetting that it started with the love of a mother, lost too soon but never truly gone. As he often told his clients in those quiet moments before the verdict, remember, there's a dignity in standing up for what's right, even if the world calls you foolish. We must let go of the life we have planned so as to accept the one that is waiting for us. He'd quote Joseph Campbell to them, especially the middle-aged folk who feared it was too late to change their destinies. If you can accept your own power, if you can embrace your worth, you will find paths you never knew existed. And more often than not, they believed him, because his own life was proof. Epilogue: Philosophical Lessons. Time revealed that Micah's story was never solely his. It wove into the stories of whistleblowers like Kyle Timmons, every once silenced employee or heartbroken widow, every single person who braved the system's might armed only with a simple demand for justice. In the end, the greatest lesson was this: true power is not about titles, wealth, or the illusions of control. True power lies in empathy, integrity, and the willingness to stand firm no matter the odds. 1. You don't need permission to fight for what is right. Credentials are tools, not destinies. If the cause is just, your resolve can surpass any barrier. 2. Fear is the ally of the oppressor. Whenever injustice persists, it cloaks itself in threats and intimidation. Overcoming fear, by forging alliances, by speaking out, by refusing to yield, is how the oppressor's power fractures. 3. Hope is contagious. One individual's stand can become a rallying cry for many. Courage sparks courage, opening doors for others to step forward. 4. Every voice matters, especially the quiet ones. Systems bank on silence. When we amplify the powerless, we become unstoppable forces for positive change. 5. Purpose transcends age. Whether you're 19 or 90, your dedication to justice can reshape worlds. It's never too late to be what you might have been. In every fleeting moment of doubt, Micah recalled those lessons. He remembered the day he first faced a sneering courtroom, the warehouse intimidation, the hush of applause when Timmons unveiled the truth. These memories showed him that roads often begin in darkness, but lead to radiant places if one keeps faith in what is right. And so, as Micah stepped into the next chapter, law school, real courtrooms, a lifetime of defending others, he held tightly to the memory of all who had guided him there. In that shared tapestry of resilience, he found the meaning of justice itself. I dedicate every victory, he would sometimes say, to those lost along the way, and to those who found the courage to stand. And there, in the echoes of a mother's love, a father's grateful tears, a whistleblower's confession, and a city's awakening, one truth shone brighter than any cynicism. The law, when wielded with heart and conviction, can be a shield for the vulnerable, and sometimes In the hands of the bold, it can even become a sword for change.